His robe still hung open as the quiet filled the room with silence thick with finality, the kind that only arrives after something irreversible. The report said it was natural causes, but those of us who understand the signs saw something else entirely, a silent, hormonal unraveling, a gradual collapse of a man's vitality not caused by illness, but by something more subtle, by neglect. And unfortunately, he's far from the only one. Every year, countless older men experience the same slow decline, losing physical strength, sexual responsiveness, emotional sharpness, all while believing they're doing the responsible thing by giving up something they assume no longer serves them. For generations, men have been told that self-pleasure is something to avoid, that it's childish, inappropriate, even shameful. But after the age of 60, that outdated idea can cost far more than you realize. Here's the truth no one talks about. When an older man stops masturbating, his body doesn't simply go on pause, it begins to break down. The prostate becomes stagnant, testosterone production plummets, emotional resilience fades. And by the time you notice something's wrong, the damage has already taken root. I'm Dr. Mojid Kara, a board-certified urologist and men's health specialist with more than 4 decades of experience helping older men restore their vitality and confidence. Over the years, I've spoken with farmers, war veterans, teachers, and proud grandfathersmen who genuinely believed that abstaining was the mature choice. And I've seen the look in their eyes when they realize what it's cost them. The reality is, they were following habits they'd learned long ago, habits rooted in shame and silence. And those habits have quietly turned against them in the years when their health depends on honest care more than ever. But there is hope. In this video, I'll explain the 4 key health consequences that often appear when men stop engaging in sexual activity in later life. And more importantly, I'll share how to avoid them. These are practical, proven strategies that have helped thousands of men safeguard their sexual health, recover their drive, and prevent problems often mistaken as just getting old. Make sure you stay with me to the end, because the final consequence I'll discuss is the one few doctors will even mention, and yet it may quietly triple your risk of serious prostate issues if left unchecked. If staying healthy, independent, and confident matters to you, you'll want to hear this. If you're watching and this message speaks to you, type 1 in the comments to let me know you're with me, or 0 if you're unsure. Either way, your voice matters. This is a conversation men deserve to have honestly, openly, and without shame. Let's begin with what I believe is the most commonly overlooked and potentially most damage effect of quitting masturbation in later years. I can't count the number of times a man in his late 60s or 70s has walked into my office looking confused and discouraged. He tells me that, seemingly overnight, he lost the ability to perform. But the truth is, it didn't happen overnight. It was building silently for years. He tells me he hasn't had a spontaneous erection in months, sometimes, even over a year. And what rattles him the most isn't the loss of performance itself, but how abruptly it seemed to happen. One day, he felt normal. The next, it was as if something had quietly switched off. Most men are completely blindsided by this. Why? Because no one ever warned them that giving up sexual activity could cause their sexual function to gradually fade, just like an unused muscle weakens over time. To put it bluntly, your penis isn't just there for appearance. It's a working organ, and it needs consistent blood flow to stay functional. When stimulation stops for extended period, especially after age 60s, serious changes begin beneath the surface. Circulation slows, oxygen levels drop, and over time, the tissue itself starts to harden, not in a good way, but in a way that leads to scarring, nerve damage, and eventually, permanent loss of function. This isn't guesswork, it's fundamental vascular science. Think about what would happen if you didn't move your legs at all for half a year. You'd lose coordination, flexibility, and possibly even forget how to walk. The same applies here. After a certain age, your sexual function doesn't pause, it deteriorates without regular use. And the worst part? This decline isn't loud or dramatic. It's subtle and creeping. You don't even notice it until one day it's unmistakable. Your morning erections stop. Gentle touch or mental arousal doesn't spark anything, and even medications stop being effective because the underlying structure is no longer responding. I've sat with mean eyes welling with emotion asking if it's possible to get it back. For some, with the right medical help, focused therapy, and serious commitment to change, there is hope. But for others, they waited too long. They assumed quitting self-pleasure was harmless or virtuous. In truth, it marked the quiet beginning of a deeper decline. Let me be absolutely clear. This isn't about sex addiction or chasing pleasure. It's about caring for a vital part of your body, one that supports your blood flow, hormone balance, and sense of identity. Occasional solo activity just once or twice a week is often enough to keep circulation going, preserve nerve health, and signal to your body that this function still matters. There's a simple but powerful truth here. What you neglect, you begin to lose. And at this stage of life, that kind of loss can become permanent. I've seen it break men not because they wanted to impress anyone, but because it left them feeling diminished, disconnected from their partner, and unsure of who they were. And the saddest part? It didn't have to happen. It was completely avoidable. All it would have taken was consistent, not indulgence, just awareness and care. Transition to next consequence. Now, while many men focus on losing their physical function, they often overlook what's happening deeper inside. The next consequence isn't as visible, but it's just as critical. Because once your hormones begin to crash, the effects ripple across your entire life, not just your sex drive, but your energy, your emotions, even your heart. Let me show you how it often begins. A man no longer feels quite like himself, but he can't explain exactly why. The mornings don't call to him the way they used to. He skips his usual walks, eats differently, and notices his mood flatten. He's more fatigued, more irritable, more withdrawn, and somewhere deep inside, he senses something is slipping, though he can't name it. In my practice, I've had men blame it on getting older, poor sleep, or just life stress. But when we dig deeper, there's often a consistent pattern behind it all. Their testosterone levels have dropped, not just as part of aging, but due to a complete lack of sexual stimulation. Here's something most men are never told. Masturbation is one of the few natural, non-medicated ways to support testosterone production in later life. It has nothing to do with fantasy or obsession. It's about how the body works. When you regularly engage in arousal and climax, your brain triggers a biological chain reaction. Dopamine increases, your hypothalamus gets activated, and even in your 60s or 70s, your testicles receive a signal to keep producing testosterone. But when that activity stops completely, when you go weeks or even months without any sexual engagement, the body interprets it as a sign that this part of life is no longer needed. In response, it dials hormone production down. And once that hormonal decline sets in, it's incredibly difficult to reverse. Low testosterone doesn't just drain energy, it erodes identity. Men begin losing focus, drive, and interest in things that once gave them purpose. Muscle strength diminishes, bones become weaker, emotional stability fades, and depression becomes far more likely. Most critically, low testosterone is linked to increased risks for heart disease and stroke, something many men don't realize until it's too late. I've watched men who were once lively and engaged turn quiet and lost, not because they were sick, but because no one had ever told them that maintaining a healthy level of sexual stimulation was key to their overall well-being. I'll never forget one patient, a retired firefighter, who sat across from me after we reviewed his lab results. His testosterone was low, and he said quietly, "Doc, I don't even recognize the man in the mirror anymore." That moment stayed with me, not because he was chasing youth or vanity, but because he felt like he was disappearing. And it didn't have to happen. With the right understanding, and a habit he'd been led to believe was shameful, he could have preserved not just his hormone levels, but his energy, his clarity, and his sense of self. The difficult truth is this: once your testosterone crashes, rebuilding it can be an uphill battle that takes years and potentially thousands of dollars in therapy and treatment. But it doesn't have to get to that point. With gentle, consistent engagement in your own intimacy, You can maintain hormonal balance far longer than most people think possible. Hormones may decline quietly, but the next consequence is something men can feel sometimes in ways that are hard to ignore. It often starts deep in the body, building slowly, almost silently, until one day it begins to interfere with daily life. And most don't realize it's tied to one small thing they've stopped doing. Let me break it down. There's a kind of discomfort that older men rarely bring up. A dull, persistent ache deep in the pelvic area. An odd pressure after sitting for too long. Or the frequent urge to urinate even when the bladder isn't full. It doesn't hit like a heart attack. It builds gradually. And before long, it's affecting your sleep, your comfort, even your peace of mind. By the time many men mention it to their doctor, they've been quietly suffering for months or even years. And what's surprising is how often we can trace it back to one simple yet overlooked cause: prostate congestion due to the absence of ejaculation. The prostate isn't a passive organ. It's an active working gland responsible for producing and storing seminal fluid, a fluid that's meant to move. When sexual activity stops entirely, especially in later years, that fluid stays put. It begins to thicken, pressure builds, inflammation sets in. That's when you begin to notice the symptoms: weaker urine flow, discomfort in the lower back or pelvis, and that frustrating nighttime urge to urinate. I've had countless older patients come in convinced they had a bladder issue only to find out their prostate was swollen and irritated. In many of those cases, medication wasn't the answer. What they needed was a return to a natural, biological process. Regular release. It's the body's way of cleaning out what's been stored. When that process is neglected, the consequences grow more serious. Some men go on to develop chronic prostatitis, an ongoing, painful inflammation that's notoriously difficult to treat. Others end up needing invasive treatments just to find relief. But physical discomfort isn't the only risk. There's a more serious concern that's rarely discussed. Studies, including one conducted at Harvard, suggest that regular ejaculation may help reduce the risk of prostate cancer. The idea is straightforward. When the prostate is emptied regularly, it prevents the buildup of potentially harmful compounds. Letting that fluid sit for too long, however, may increase long-term inflammation and risk. One man I worked with hadn't been sexually active for almost 2 years. He said he didn't feel the need any thought that part of life was behind him. But when his PSA levels shot up and we ran more tests, we found significant prostate congestion. He was swollen, irritated, and heading toward a biopsy, something that might have been avoided with a few small intentional habits. This isn't about indulgence or desire. It's about pain prevention. It's about recognizing that the male body doesn't suddenly stop needing care just because you've reached 60 or 70. If anything, it needs more thoughtful attention than ever before. If anything, this part of a man's well-being deserves more care, more understanding. The prostate may be one of the most physically vulnerable organs in aging men, but what often gets overlooked is the emotional cost of neglect. And while a congested prostate may cause discomfort and long, restless nights, this final consequence cuts even deeper. It reaches into how a man sees himself, and for many, it's the one change they don't notice until it's already rooted itself in their everyday life. Let me show you what I mean. It's the quietest kind of decline, and yet one of the most devastating. You won't see it on a medical chart or lab result, but you feel a slow dimming of your internal spark, a sense of disconnect that you can't quite describe. It creeps in gradually. You stop engaging in self-intimacy because you believe it's no longer necessary. Maybe you think it's just a part of aging, or something that doesn't matter if you're no longer in a relationship. But that decision doesn't only affect your body, it starts to touch your emotional core. I've spoken to many older men who describe feeling empty, not from illness, but from a kind of emotional numbness that set in over time, months or even years, without any release, without intimacy of any kind, even with themselves. Slowly, they begin to feel invisible, as though they no longer matter. And of course, they rarely talk about it. Most were never taught how. But the signs are there in how they move, in how they avoid eye contact or mirrors, in the softer tone of their voice when asked how they're really doing. This isn't about sex for the sake of sex. It's about life force, about the deeply personal link between your physical body and emotional health. When you give up self-pleasure entirely, you shut down one of the last remaining ways to feel joy, presence, and identity. For men in their 60s and beyond, that's not a minor change, it's a deep emotional wound. Because arousal and release aren't just for the young, they're part of what keeps your brain alert, your hormones balanced, and your emotional stability intact. The chemicals involved dopamine, oxytocin, endorphins play a huge role in mood regulation and in keeping anxiety, sadness, and even memory decline at bay. Without them, men are more vulnerable to depression, loneliness, and even early signs of cognitive decline. I've watched once outgoing, energetic men slowly turn inward, not because their life circumstances changed dramatically, but because they stopped engaging with the part of themselves that made them feel vital. And here's what makes this truly dangerous. Most men never realize that their emotional numbness is connected to that quiet choice they made months ago. They never associate the growing emptiness with their withdrawal from intimacy. And by the time they do, the damage is often already in motion. And recovering from it, it takes more than just a new routine or a prescription alone won't fix what's been lost. Real healing takes something deeper. It takes reconnecting with yourself. It's about remembering that even in your later years, your body still wants to feel, to express, and to stay connected to life. This final consequence is the one that hurts me the most to witness, because it robs men of their quiet dignity without them even knowing it. It takes away the calm confidence they once walked with, the warmth they once gave so freely, and leaves behind someone they barely recognize. But here's what I need every man to understand. It's not too late. It's never too late to return to yourself, to reignite the inner vitality you thought was gone. And in the last part of this video, I'll show you the practical, proven steps you can take to reclaim what many others have lost, but what you still have time to protect. Let's finish this journey together. There's a belief that many older men carry deep inside, that intimacy, desire, and pleasure are things meant only for youth. That at some point, it's natural or even nobleto, let that part of life go quiet. But after more than 3 decades working with men in their 60s, 70s, and beyond, I can tell you that belief is quietly costing men more than they realize. It's robbing them of their energy, their emotional balance, and their sense of self. You've now seen how giving up masturbation in older age can lead to a gradual loss of sexual function, a steep drop in hormone levels, inflammation of the prostate, and a quiet erosion of emotional vitality. These aren't minor inconveniences. They're major shifts, changes that don't come from age itself, but from neglect. The encouraging news? It doesn't have to go this way. Your body still remembers how to respond. Your mind still seeks closeness. And your long-term health still relies on you caring for every part of who you are, even the parts society tends to ignore. This isn't about indulgence or craving. It's about preserving your strength, your clarity, and your sense of wholeness. You have nothing to be ashamed of for choosing care over silence, for choosing life. If this message struck a chord with you, I invite you to take it to heart. Let it move you, because this is personal. And if you're ready to reclaim this part of your well-being, know that I'm here with you. You're not on this path alone. And most importantly, your story isn't over yet. If what you've heard today resonated with you, even just a little, type 1 in the comments to show you're still here, still invested, still fighting for your health. And if you're unsure, that's perfectly okay too. Type 0 and let me know what you're thinking. Either way, you matter. Your voice matters. And no matter where you are right now, you're not alone.